about the teleological theories. Today, we will be talking about the deontological theories. Kung babalikan natin ang Unit 2, ang deontology, sinasabi niya that the act is good in itself and do not consider the consequences of an action. Lagi nating tatandaan na sa deontology, magiging morally right lang ang isang act base sa nature nito. Hindi na importante ang resulta, makakabuti man siya o hindi. Nahahati sa dalawa ang deontology. Parang sa alak lang, may puro and meron ding may chaser. Una, ang pure deontology. Sinasabi dito na the nature of an act can be judged based on its conformity to an immutable moral rule. In simple terms, if an act is an example or a variant of a moral rule, the act is right. However, if it contradicts a moral rule, then the act is wrong. But take note that the consequences of the act are unimportant. Pangalawa naman ang mixed deontology. Basically, ang pinagkaiba nito sa pure deontology ay kinoconsider nito kung may bearing ang consequences. Sinasabi dito na hindi lang nakaayon ang nature ng act sa mga moral rules. Kung may magandang patutunguhan yung ginawa natin, pwede itong maging tama kahit salungat siya sa moral rule. So, pure deontology will not consider the consequences in the deliberation of the rightness of an act, while mixed deontology would consider favorable consequences as relevant variables that can defeat the wrongness of an act.
There are two types of deontologists based on their perspective on the moral significance of rules: the rule deontologist and the act deontologist. These two distinctions may seem familiar because it is also observed in utilitarianism. If we recall in the third module, the act and rule utilitarian are differentiated based on what is the focal point of their justification, the act or the rule. It serves as the same function for the distinction between the rule and the act deontologist. As Acuña defines it, the rule deontologist is a deontologist who accepts certain moral rules as the foundation of morality. The rightness of an act is determined through its consistency and inconsistency with the moral rules. An act is right if it is consistent with the moral rule, and an act is wrong if it is inconsistent with the moral rule. The act deontologist, on the other hand, would consider both the natures of the act and the rules. The analysis on whether or not an act is right starts by examining the nature of the act. The role of the moral rules in this case, instead of being significant in the sense that it serves as the foundation for what is good and right, it serves as guidelines as to what should be done in similar moral situations. Specific examples will be explored in the discussion of pure rule deontology.
Do you believe that what makes an act right or wrong should not rest on its consequences? Say, isa akong fairy, and not the type of fairy na nasa Urban Dictionary. Hindi ako magsisprinkle ng fairy dust sa isang weak na fairy kahit na nangihina na siya. Why? Because fairy dust is only for licensed use. Those are the rules. Kant insisted that this scenario is deemed morally right because it follows a duty or rule, regardless of the positive impact that breaking the rule might achieve. However, if an act is done with goodwill, it would be considered good in and of itself without any qualifications. Guided by goodwill, an action is considered morally good if it is performed out of a sense of duty. That is the Kantian morality, namely, duty and duty for the sake of duty. Diba? Nakaka-trigger yan sa mga health-allied professionals, puro duty. Pero what does this mean? Well, divide natin siya sa dalawa. The distinction between conformity with duty and acting for the sake of duty. Ang example dyan ni Acuña is ang pag-aaruga ng isang ina sa kanyang mga anak dahil takot siya sa kanyang asawa. That is acting only in conformity with duty. Yes, moral obligation niya ang motherhood, which is acting for the sake of duty. Pero kung ginagawa niya lang ito dahil sa kanyang asawa, then the mother is acting only in conformity with duty. Moving forward, Kant believes that all of us are rational beings. That means we can think, decide, and figure out what's right or wrong based on logic, not just feelings or impulses. So when we're deciding what's right, we're actually thinking logically about what would make sense for everyone, not just ourselves. Kunwari tinatamad ako mag-fill ng RVP na to, sabihin ko na kay Sir Ian na, Sir, dinatnan po ako. Ganun. Simple, di ba? Pero need natin isipin, paano kung ginawa din ito ng kabilang group? Pati na rin ng, kunwari, critique group. Whenever it's convenient for them. Eh di magtataka si sir, bakit yung mga presenters today di makapag-present? May mga hinaharap na hinanakit, ganyan. Mabubutas tayo kay sir in the end. And if Sir Ian found out that it was all a lie, mawawala na yung trust niya sa atin when excusing ourselves from his class. So in Kant's view, if it's not okay for everyone to lie about being sick to dodge responsibilities, then it's not okay for you either. The lie fails the universalizability test. Because if everyone did it, it would make lying meaningless and create a world where no one could be trusted to tell the truth. Let's explain the universalizability test furthermore. This is the part where Kant says, if you think something is okay for you, ask yourself if it would be okay for everyone to do it. An example of Acuña would be stealing. Kunwari, magnanakaw ka ng upuan sa UPDEPPO. To state the maxim of your action, it would be, it is alright to steal this chair from UPDEPPO because I can't afford it. Example lang. But to universalize the action, if lahat ng students sa UPDEPPO na hindi maka-afford ng upuan ay magnakaw ng upuan, wala nang matitirang upuan sa DEP, di ba? There would just be chaos. Mawawala ng upuan, bakit magnanakaw yung mga estudyante, di ba? Paano kung umextend pa tong chaos na to sa Diliman campus? Like, bakit lahat ng isko minamarkos yung mga upuan? Magtataka sila, di ba? Magsasara lahat ng campus, magkakaroon ng crisis sa UP, di ba? Ang OA. Pero lesson learned. Huwag magnakaw ng upuan sa UPDEPPO because it fails the universalizability test. In Kant's world, if something is moral, it has to be moral for everyone at all times. If not, then it's not moral at all.
Kant states 5 principal ways for his categorical imperatives. Formula 1, or the formula of universal law. That's the first. Kant is basically telling us that we should only do an action that can be considered as a universal law. Our actions should be universal and everyone should be able to do it also. This emphasizes the universality of the law. Universality, according to Kant, is the essence of morality. Next is the Formula 1A, or the formula of the law of nature. This formula is a subordinate version of the first because it states that we should act in a way that our principles could be adopted by everyone else as if they were natural laws. Our principles should be accepted by everyone. This formula is not concerned with the essence of morality like the previous. It only acts as a guide for our moral actions. Kant says that moral law is not the law of nature. If they were identical, then there would be no need for moral obligation because we will be basically morally perfect. Formula 2, or the formula of the end in itself, basically tells us that we should not objectify ourselves and others. We should treat each other as an end and never as a mean to an end. People are not tools or instruments that we can use to get what we really want. Our respect for every individual human being will limit our choices. So kapag broken ka, hindi daw tama na humanap ng rebound para makamove on. Kasi you're basically using that person to move on. Basically using him or her as a mean to an end. Moving on to the third formula, or the formula of autonomy. Kant suggests that our intentions and decisions should be aligned with the principles that could be universally accepted. Our actions should reflect values that we believe everyone should follow. Kant also states that your will, as a rational moral agent, makes the moral law. This was also his solution to the problem of the moral obligation. We have an obligation to obey the moral law as it is the law of human reason. And lastly, the Formula 3A, or the formula of the kingdom of ends. We should behave as if our actions and principles contribute to a community where everyone's dignity and rights are respected. In other words, our actions should benefit everyone. Kant was aware that we have the tendency to use one another as means. According to him, when we view all men as an ends in themselves, then it would follow that good society would be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These formulas, according to Kant, posits practical reasons for making the right decisions.
Moving on to our discussion on humanism, according to Oxford Languages, humanism refers to a rationalist outlook or system of thought attaching a prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. It is a Renaissance cultural movement which turned away from the medieval scholasticism and revived interest in ancient Greek and Roman thought. Humanism as a school of thought has its long history and its roots in the early times. Philosophers have traced the tradition of humanism as far back as the 5th century BC, through Pythagoras' man is the measure of all things. During this period, Socrates was also preaching the virtue of self-knowledge, knowing one's duty to oneself as wisdom, knowing one's duty to others as justice, and knowing one's duty to God as piety. Sir Acuña summarizes humanism into one sentence. The basic premise of humanism is that man is a rational being endowed with the potentials for truth, beauty, and moral goodness. Here comes the middle of the 2nd century BC. Humanism as a tradition has found its way to a term. Humanitas, a Latin word meaning cultivated intelligence, was used by the Roman thinkers. From this came the term that we know of as humanism. Roman humanism continued the Greek tradition which, quoting Sir Acuña, recognized the capacity of man to develop his human potentials, emphasizing man's intellectual faculties because it defines his supremacy as a rational being. The meaning of humanism during the Italian Renaissance was, as previously mentioned, a turning point from the heavily scholastic Middle Ages. From a widely used dogmatic, as Britannica describes, lens of religion in examining philosophical questions, the Renaissance steered towards placing emphasis on a man's worth. This eventually led to the reawakening of the belief that man's destiny is in his own hands.
Humanism is a movement that has popped up in different forms over the years, from the Renaissance period to today's fight for human rights. At its core, it's about recognizing and respecting human dignity. Naniniwala ang mga humanista that every person has worth just because they're human. A humanist imperative is a call to develop these ethics that respect each person's humanity by using our human abilities, like reasoning, empathy, and creativity to make good choices and build a better society. It's about making the world better for people, by people. Now let's dive into the specifications of humanist ethics by Professor Acuña. One of the specifications is, it takes off from a scientific view of man. Number 2, a coherent and comprehensive system of beliefs and values. And number 3, it shall present and establish certain concepts that can be used as important analytic tools. And these concepts being A, the definition of intrinsic good and right, B, the concept of opportunities in life, and C, the principle of justice.
Acuña constructed his own version of the humanist ethics where he incorporated many common elements of different humanist schools in a common ethical framework. So firstly, the scientific view of a man. Man is dynamic and evolving. According to Kant, man undergoes transformation from being his egocentric character at birth to the acquisition of reciprocity in the initial stage of maturation, and then into a sociocentric being at the highest stage of moral development. Man has certain innate potentials that he has to develop to define his humanity. The next is the coherent and comprehensive systems of beliefs and values. There are certain beliefs and values in our society, and according to Kant, if internalized by a critical number of Filipinos, may alter the behavior predisposition of the whole nation. For example, in other nations such as Japan and Singapore, values are being taught in schools at an early age. So, preschool pa lang sila, tinuturo na sa kanila yung values. This explains why members of these nations are highly disciplined, even in the absence of an observer or punishment. Tayo kasi mga Pilipino, kadalasan, simpleng segregation ng basura, hindi pa natin masundan. This is because the values that were taught to us wasn't internalized, explaining the lack of discipline within the Filipinos. And lastly, Acuña incorporated the concepts that can be used as important analytic tools. First is the intrinsic good, which Acuña defined as the development of human potentials along cognitive, affective, aesthetic, moral, and spiritual dimension. He believed that developing our human potentials equals to moral goodness. For utilitarians, the true meaning of happiness must be measured in terms of the development of human potentials, as it is the most satisfying and most rewarding of all human experience. Next is Acuña's definition of moral obligation in terms of the good. He believes that actions that promote the development of human potentials are right, while the ones that hinder it are wrong. This is rooted from the principle of humanism, which states that an action is right if and only if, of all possible courses of actions, it is the one most likely to promote the development of human potential.
Our primary duty is to develop our human potentials to the fullest. Sir Acuña explains our primary duty in this way. There exists our potential. We have an obligation to develop these potentials as much as possible. This is unconditional and non-negotiable. Dahil may potential tayo, natural lang na magkaroon ng pagnanais na payabungin palalo ang potential na ito. Development is in fact natural in accordance with the conditions of our environment. Sinasabi pa ni Sir Acuña na kahit may free will pa tayo, never daw pipiliin ng isang tao ang pigilin ang potential niya sa kanyang sarili at sa kapwa niya. Sa ganitong paraan, pinaglalaban ni Sir Acuña na unconditional and non-negotiable ang pangunahing obligasyon natin bilang nabubuhay na tao na mayroong potensyal, ang payabungin ito hanggat sa makakaya natin, sa cognitive, emotive, aesthetic, moral at spiritual na aspeto man ito.
Next is the duty to your fellow men. You must treat the development of human potentials of your fellow men as your own. Hindi pwedeng mag-develop ka ng potential at the expense of stopping the development of the potentials of your fellow men. It is also a give-and-take process, reciprocal, in which you help the development of the potentials of your fellow men so that they will help in the development of your potential.
As stated earlier, as we mature, we acquire a social-centric orientation where we become a social being. This shifts our one-sided view of duty to develop our human potentials to a reciprocal one which helps others to develop their human potentials as well. As we become mature beings, we are expected to respect the dignity and rights of the people. This also reflects Kant's formula of the kingdom of ends. We are social beings and we need society to be fully human. Society provides opportunities in life which we need to develop our human potentials. It provides the blueprint for human development. Thinking about it, it is society that decides whether an act is morally wrong or not. However, this depends on the society that we belong in. Each community has its own traditions and norms, kaya pag nasa ibang lugar tayo, laging tinuturo sa atin na maging sensitive sa mga actions. Dahil hindi natin namamalayan, baka nakaka-offend na tayo.
Now we have learned that society provides the blueprint for human development. To be more specific, the opportunities in life that society provides us with are the blueprints of human development. They determine how far members can develop and what they can achieve. Societal development can be analyzed by looking at the blueprint. What possible opportunities can a society offer, and to whom can these opportunities be possibly available, and what actually are available to whom? is very telling of how a society is developed. To put this into perspective, dito lang sa Pilipinas, makikita natin ang kakulangan sa oportunidad sa edukasyon na kahit sa ang perspektiba natin titignan ay hindi pantay at patas. Ito ang katotohanan ng educational crisis dito sa Pilipinas. Ito ay kadahilanan na hindi nakamit ang man's fundamental right na nagsasabing if there is an opportunity in life available to one member, it must in principle be available to other members as well. Sinasabi rin ni Sir Acuña na ang estruktura ng lipunan sa kahit anumang panahon sa kasaysayan ay maaari nating gamitin para ma-determine ang range, scope, limit at schemes ng distribution ng mga oportunidad sa mga miyembro ng lipunan noon sa panahon na iyon. May panahon na hindi pa ipinagkakaloob ang edukasyon at karapatang bumoto sa mga kababaihan. May panahon na hindi pa pinapayagan ang same-sex marriage sa ibang bansa at marami pang ibang halimbawa. Kaya kung iisipin, may kakayahang ikahon ng societal structure ang kapasidad ng taong makamit ang kanyang maximum potential. For example, doon sa panahon na hindi pa binibigyan ng edukasyon at karapatang bumoto ang mga babae, hindi nila makakamit ang maximum human potential nila kasi nga hindi pa sila makakapag-aral at hindi pa nila maboboses ang kanilang mga opinion dahil hindi pa sila nabibigyan ng karapatang bumoto. At meron naman din sa mga hindi pa pinapayag ang same-sex marriage na kung saan ang ating mga LGBTQIA people ay hindi pa makakamit ang kanilang maximum human potential dahil meron pang nagpipigil sa kanila sa loob ng lipunan. To give another example, it is natural for our cognitive process to think that in communist societies, its members' actions are very limited. Hence, the opportunities provided for them to attain their maximum human potential is limited. Thus, as Sir Acuña says, man and society are inextricably linked with one another. In Sir Acuña's humanist theory of society, he defines society as an abstract term referring to the aggregate of its individual members. In this case, society is the totality of individuals making up the Filipino nation. He says that an ideal society is a society where there are equal opportunities in equal measure for all of its members. In support of this, he claims that a society exists because of our unconditional obligation to ensure the provision of opportunities in life for all of the members. So it follows that we have our primary duty and our duty to our fellow men, to develop our human potential and to develop the human potential of other members of the society. Everyone must therefore be willing to provide support or to sacrifice his own personal interest, if, by doing so, it would ensure the provision of more opportunities in life for all of the members. To think how it can be contrasting that in the humanist perspective we develop our own potential to the highest possible extent, but then be told to sacrifice personal interests, Sir Acuña explains that in our natural maturation, our perspectives shift from egoism to reciprocity, as explained earlier in the sociocentric orientation. He goes on further to say, after all, the development of the whole society is more important than the development of any of its members, which I personally believe is a statement of value personal to Sir Acuña and can be interpreted as a rather inconsistent statement given its utilitarian undertone when what is being explained is a humanist theory. But if we are going to read the humanist creed, the value or the intention behind this statement just states that our primary duty and our duty to our fellow men goes hand in hand, wherein we develop our potential, our human potential to the fullest extent without necessarily bringing the potential of other people in society down. So it goes hand in hand. But I would just like to clarify that it could be seen as an inconsistent statement or something that would be contradictory given that we are actually exploring here the humanist theory of Sir Acuña.
The meaning of Philippine history can be seen in the trends that offer more opportunities for a growing number of Filipinos over time. As society changes from one era to another, so do the chances for people to develop and succeed. According to Acuña, this progression, the Filipino experience shaped by history, is what defines the essence of Philippine history. But in today's Philippine society, we still see a major issue, which is inequality. There's an uneven distribution of opportunities, especially in meeting basic needs and nurturing human potential. This inequality is largely driven by economic and social structures that remain unfair. To give everyone an equal shot at reaching their potential, opportunities need to be spread more equitably across all members of society. In short, Philippine history is meaningful when it's about creating more chances for growth, and breaking down barriers and offering everyone an actual fair chance to succeed. Next, we move on to the humanities theory of government. In society alone, there's no natural power to enforce anyone's will. That's why we need a government. And according to Acuña, this government derives all its power from the people. It's democratic, especially in the Philippines. We are a democratic government. Meaning that people choose their leaders through elections. From a humanist perspective, the main job of the government isn't just to keep order. It's to promote human development. This means creating more opportunities and benefits, especially for those who can't reach their full potential without support. The humanists very much criticize the government styles of the Dutertes and the Marcoses because, they really didn't support any human development. They much more downgraded it. So now, what does a just government look like in a humanistic point of view? So the humanist principle of justice says that any law, policy, or program is just only if it provides more opportunities to those who need them most. In other words, ang gobyernong tapat, pantay-pantay ang pagtingin sa bawat isa. It aims for equity by focusing on those with the greatest needs. So it's more on equality, pantay-pantay talaga. If a government fails to uphold this principle of justice, people have the right to replace it. The government's power comes from the people. And if it forgets its role in promoting equity and human development, the citizens have the power and the right to demand change. It may be through elections or through people power revolution, di ba?
The humanist creed is divided into 7 parts. The first part summarizes the primary duty of man to develop his potentials to the fullest, while the second part summarizes man's duty to his fellow men to have a reciprocal relationship where we help each other develop our potentials to the fullest.
The third stanza of the Humanist Creed encapsulates the ideal society as supported by our primary duty and our duty to our fellow men. The fourth stanza of the Humanist Creed encapsulates the role of opportunities in life as blueprints that can be used as an analytical tool by examining the societal structure that would be beneficial in planning and striving for social development. The fifth stanza criticizes the utilitarian moral framework because of its tendency to favor the interests of the rich and the powerful as opposed to the humanist framework, which does not only include individual development but also extends further to the individual duty of helping our fellow men develop their potential as well.
The sixth stanza emphasizes the application of humanist principle of justice to better our society and government coming from the point of view of a humanist, which would guarantee us equal rights within our justice system. Lastly, the final stanza of the Humanist Creed portrays the government and citizenry to be interconnected. As long as the government stays faithful to the humanist principle of justice, loyalty and obedience from citizenry